1/5 of India's population remains undernourished and some 3,000 children die each day from hunger-related causes, by all appearances, India, or at least the Indian government, is hoarding too much food.
More than 2 decades after a green revolution made India the second most populous country self-sufficient in grain production, half of India's children are still malnourished. About 350 million Indians go to bed hungry every night. Pockets of starvation deaths like those in the barren district of Rajasthan have surfaced regularly in recent years.
Yet the government is sitting on wheat surplus, now about 53 million metric tons. That would stretch to the moon and back at least twice. Persistent securing surrounding such bounty has become a source of shame in a nation that has taken pride in feeding itself.
The grain prices in India have increased so extremely over time that hardly anyone can afford the grains necessary to live. For example, cereal prices rose from 6.6% to 17.8% in only 1 year, making the inflation 4.86%. And instead of working to assist the needs of the citizens, the government only continues to hoard the grains in order not to lose inventory.
The irony of the situation is that the Indian government does not even have a sufficient amount of storage space to keep all the hoarded grains. The Food Corporation of India has the capacity to store only 53 million tons of covered warehouses, thus causing the precious food to rot.
JustFood.org defines food justice as communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy food. Healthy food is affordable, culturally appropriate, and grown locally with care for the well-being of the land, workers, and consumers. Through the hoarding of all the grains, the citizens are being deprived of their requirements.
Grain hoarding defies Indian society of all these rights. The food is not affordable, and much less, not even accessible to the consumer starving every single day. Now you tell me, where's the justice?
The mass amount of food insecurity throughout India works as a burden to the economy. The amount of hunger and malnutrition creates less of a workforce as people are simply working to survive. Increasing health costs for the government also occurs. Ultimately, the lack of grain distribution is a weakening element to the government and society as a whole.
The primary reason for hoarding grains is the fluctuation of prices. Cartels encouraged by the government are most at fault. The hoarders are creating artificial shortages and then swindling citizens continually.
The grain hoarding in India was first initiated when the government wanted total control of inflation prices. The government currently has rice and wheat worth about 60,000 crore, yet has a disinvestment target of 54,000 for the upcoming financial year. The ratio is completely off, causing a burden to the economical standpoints of the government.
The increase of big food companies in the food industry has jeopardized the government's control of food prices. Corporate retail and food distribution has tripled over the past 4 years. Similarly, the government has manipulated trade policies to allow big traders to make huge profits of both exports and imports.
India also recognized the futuristic dilemmas of grain hoarding. Abduriza Abasan, an economist at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, claimed, "India may not be able to export wheat at current prices. It will be difficult for them to dispose the extra wheat into the market. This could eventually create a hangover in the domestic market, and it's a problem for them."
Not only was the government feeling pressure to hoard grains, but private farmers also displayed concern involving in the inflation prices. Sebastian Sharma, a farmer from the Prihai village of northern India, states, "I will hold the crop until I get a better price. I am hopeful for an increase in prices later, as happened last year."
Although hoarding grains could be viewed as possibly financially beneficial to the government and farmers, the ethicality of the situation is absurd. Despite the possible financial gain, the malnourishment of 230 million people does not validate this. Malnutrition accounts for nearly 50% of child deaths in India.
The government's attempt to control inflation has proved insufficient in fighting the cause. In 2013, the government passed the Food Security Act. The bill was intended to provide subsidized wheat and rice to 67% of the population, thus reducing malnutrition. However, the indirectness of the act has allowed the problem to persist and increase national debt.
The bill had the potential to fix the majority of the nutritional injustices through the distribution of cheap grain. However, what is of concern is how much of the grain is directly going to those who need it most, versus how much will be siphoned off by greedy hands along the way. Similarly, the Wall Street Journal claims that India does not actually have records of the most extreme poverty-stricken families.
Without records, the government ultimately has no way of knowing who the food should be distributed to. Thus, the act is almost meaningless. A system which requires family income as well as family size would help inform the government of the most needy. With a system like this, it could be confirmed that the hungriest families are the ones receiving the subsidized food.
Not only does the act affect the hungry, but also the farmers involved. The cheap prices of the subsidized food would alter the market, so farmers who couldn't sell to the government-assured programs would disenable them to sell in the open market because prices would be forced down. It harms the economy and the private farmers working that are involved in the bill in order to stop nutrition.
According to the Food Security Organization, it is important that Indian policymakers acknowledge and address these flaws in order to best benefit the country as a whole. Those flaws more specifically being the proper targeting implementations.
It is clear that the current food system in India is not reaching the nutritional standards in order for proper survival. Grain hoarding within both the government and private farming corporations works as a barrier to the most basic needs of India's citizens. Attempts such as the Food Security Act have been put in place to override this injustice. However, the starving statistics prove it insufficient.
Thank you.
All right, let's go with Courtney first. So I heard you guys mentioning a lot of lenses along the way.
Yeah.
So what lenses do you see as the most important in the cause and the solution? Can you just recap that for us?
Yeah. So I feel like when you first look at it, you could see that the economic lens would be the most important because the government, as well as private farming corporations, could be getting money by holding the grains until the prices rose. But as the prices rise, then like any society can't afford the grains to survive, so then it becomes really more of an ethical situation because they simply can't afford it.
And what about the solution?
Solution, they attempted to make a bill that would fix it, but I feel like that's more like political because the government needs to find a way that satisfies like their like economic like situation as well as helping the like financial of the citizens.
Okay. And Demi, what information did you find that when you were doing the research that you were having a hard time finding, and how did you go about trying to address that problem?
Well, one of the, when we first looked up the topic, it was actually not a lot of websites just addressing food hoarding, just grain hoarding in general. There was a lot about food hoarding and starvation. So we took those statistics and kind of worked them and then went to the websites that did have the grain hoarding and tried to involve both of them so that we had the maximum amount of information.